Hey everybody, Jack Powers back with another episode of Infamous Federal Prisoners. I've got my little friend and my little daughter here and my mama. And I want to talk today about a prisoner that most everybody in the world is probably familiar with. I met him in 1989 in Tampa, Florida, when he came to the county jail for a very brief moment for a last-minute hearing on a death penalty appeal. I was arrested in 1989, February the 21st, and I was incarcerated at the Hillsborough County Jail in Tampa. I was placed in the maximum security wing, which was on the second floor, and it was a pod of single cells, top and bottom, where you had an officer stationed right within the pod at a desk, cameras around, a guard that sat out front at another desk, and it was the highest security that Hillsborough County. All the death row prisoners were in there, and there were a few of them waiting trial, going on appeals, etc., and so forth. But I'm in the cell. And of course, when the doors open, everybody looks to see what's going on, who's coming in now or what have you. And it's about 7 p.m. at night, and the door opens down below, and in comes this dude, tall guy, about maybe my height, maybe, I don't know, probably about my height, I guess, roughly. We were eye to eye. And he was thin, good-looking guy. I mean, I don't know how guys look, but I mean, he was, he looked like a lawyer. He looked like some kind of, college-educated dude. No tattoos, no nothing. Thin. Looked like he was in good shape. Anyway, they bring him past my cell, and they put him in the cell next to me. Lock the door. And they have some words with him. They talk to him and tell him that they're going to get him a food tray and stuff like that. And they were pretty cordial with him. And he was very cordial with them. He was like very, very friendly with them and everything. And so come to find out, it was Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy. And the reason that I found out it was Ted Bundy was because a few minutes later, a nurse, a male nurse, came around to do his medical intake and called him Theodore. And he was mad about that. He had no problem correcting that dude. Listen, my name is not Theodore. My name is Ted. Ted. Not Teddy, not Theodore. Ted. Please, Ted. So the guy was like, okay, Mr. Bundy, okay. Don't get all upset. I'm like, what? This is Ted Bundy next to me? And then I'm like, yeah, that is Ted Bundy. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I didn't know much about his case. I didn't know much actually about him at that time. But everybody else in America must have known something because they were handling him with kid gloves. Now, as it turned out, Ted and I had some conversations through the vent. He wasn't exceedingly talkative, but he was right on the verge of being executed. He was within a couple of weeks, I guess, or maybe, I don't know, maybe even days. I don't remember. He was very close to his execution date. So he wanted somebody to talk to. He needed somebody to talk to. And I was right next door to him. And I was always interested in the prisoners and the stories that they had to tell. And, I didn't ask him anything about how many women you murdered and raped and murdered, kidnapped, raped and murdered, or anything like that. I didn't ask him about that specifically. Talk to him more about his time on death row, what his family, how his family was taking all of this, whether he had remorse. And I want to just hesitate for a second on the remorse point, because those guys, they don't have a lick of remorse. None. Nada. Zero. There's no remorse. Ted Bundy didn't have any remorse for his victims. Nothing. Zero. And do you know why? They're not capable. He was a psychopath. A true, dyed-in-the-wool psychopath. Psychopaths have no ability to have remorse for their victims. And when I say psychopath, I mean somebody that is suffering from an active psychosis, not just a personality disorder. There's a difference, big difference. It's not just a personality disorder, it's a serious psychopathology. In other words, it's so deep in that person's psyche that it's literally impossible to get it out. It's part of their overall operational equipment in their head. It's an element of their design. So, yeah, he was a true psychopath. And, I've met quite a few. The mass shooters, I'll talk about them later in other videos, but yeah, they're kind of the same way. They don't have any remorse for any of their victims. They can't feel. It's not just not feeling empathy. It's a total abandonment or inability to recognize what you did wrong. And I think in that context, he just couldn't bring his mind to that place. But what he did talk about was, he talked about his wife/girlfriend who was coming to visit him on death row. And he talked about his children. He actually has 3 children, not just one. He actually has 2 boys and the older girl is from another relationship. But he was able to have sex with his girlfriend/wife while he was on death row, according to him. And, I believe him on that. I believe him because other death row prisoners that came from there said the same thing, confirmed. They had officers there at the Florida State Penitentiary in the visiting room from time to time who would take a $100 bill and look the other way while they went into this mop closet where there happened to be a couple mattresses stacked up. So, and they could spend 10 minutes or whatever it was and come back out. If they wanted to go on a cheaper plan, they could give $50 to the dude and they could go behind the vending machines for 5 or 10 minutes, whatever it was. So that's how that worked. That's how Ted Bundy was able to actually have sex with his then girlfriend/wife and impregnate her twice while he was on death row in Florida State Prison. Not a lot of people know that. Nevertheless, I absolutely believe it to be 100% true. If anybody has any information about this, and if I'm wrong, then correct me for sure. But that's what Ted Bundy told me through the vent. And he said that life on death row was not as bad as people think that it is. He had plenty to do because he kept himself involved in his legal work, in his legal studies and studying cases, and I know how that is. It's a good time passer. Once when you get into the law and you get into your case and you start going through all the research and looking at cases and preparing draft motions and talking to people and writing letters, you are definitely burning up a lot of time throughout the day. He had a typewriter. He had access. I asked him if he was interested in ever writing a book himself, because I really thought that would be something people would really be interested in. But apparently he wasn't interested at all in telling his story. Now everybody knows what his story is. Basically, he came from an educated family. He went to college. He got his law degree, or got close to getting his law degree before he dropped out. And then for some reason, he just went off the tracks. He just took off and started kidnapping women at random and, sexually raping, molesting them, and then killing them. And I want to say this. I want to say that there's people out there who are like that, obviously. This happens. And they're not thinking through what they're doing. It's some evilness, some evil spirit, let's say, that's in their heart and mind, and it's driving them to do this, whether it's brought on by alcohol or drugs or psychoses or schizophrenia or whatever. Who knows? Who knows? But there are people out there who are they're just straight up psychopaths. And they are dangerous. But they're really dangerous because typically we don't know who they are. Their crimes just make no sense. It's hard to track them down. They do it at random. And unless they make some kind of a big mistake, like Bundy eventually did, you don't catch them. He was traveling from state to state. He was taking whatever monies that they had, probably a little bit of money on him. He was taking those and getting away. But he was just a dude. And I talked to him a little bit about death. I asked him, I said to him straight out, I said, Ted, you're probably going to the chair. You know they're going to seat you in that chair and pull the switch on you. And he's like, yeah, they probably will. But I'm going to fight it out to the end, and maybe I get lucky. Maybe somebody somewhere says, let's put this on hold again. I said, yeah, but how do you feel? How do you feel about your own death? And he was honest about it. He said, you know what? I'm scared. I live in a cage. I can't get away anyway. And he would have if he could. He would have escaped if he could, for sure. And if he had have escaped, he would have went right back to doing what he was doing before. He wouldn't have just went off somewhere and lived by himself in seclusion. he would have stolen a car or killed somebody and took their car, and he would have been right back to what he was doing again, and they would have caught him within, a couple of weeks or something, and they probably would have shot him on the spot or brought him right back in and gave him a fast execution, whatever. But he wasn't completely resigned to his death, but he was aware that it was going to happen. He was at least partially aware, mostly aware, that it was a likely possibility. So he was scared. He was scared. He wasn't scared or, like I say, remorseful. He was scared for himself. I mean, I often wonder if one of his so-called victims had pulled out a hidden 38, when she was in the van or in the back or in the passenger seat of his little VW, where the passenger seat laid all the way back or was taken out. Wonder if there was somebody that had flipped the script, reversed the roles, took him hostage and took him to some desolate place and just made him beg for his life or whatever, and then shot him in the back of the head. But that's what it was like to him. It was like a reverse role now. He was the victim. He was the one who was being held hostage. He was the one who was now going to be murdered. So that's how he looked at it. My book, or books, here's one of them, ADX Supermax, The Alcatraz of the Rockies. This is about my time in the ADX and everything that I went through there, the tortures, all the trauma and everything else. And this is another book that I wrote called American Justice Correcting Its Flaws, John J. Powers. This is Jack Powers because my nickname's Jack. Everybody calls me Jack. This one's under John because it's more of a treatise on criminal justice reform. So anybody who wants to buy a copy of one of these books would be helping me out greatly. And I appreciate you and appreciate you checking in. I'll give you more in the future. There's a whole bunch of people, as I said, that I ran into, rubbed elbows with over the years. And they're all very interesting stories. And it'll give you some insight, perhaps, on what all this means. So until next time, sayonara.